Good morning. My name is Winnie Sullivan, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner at Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I just want to start by welcoming everyone to the Higher Education Publishing Call. I believe this is our fifth call, and we're continuing on, so look forward to that schedule. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our special guests and our panelists for taking the time out of your busy day to be on a call with us this morning. So just a little bit about the call. The purpose of these calls are to engage with diverse communities in order to identify barriers in post-secondary education. Our office is diligently working in collaboration with diverse communities to provide equitable access to information and advice that lead to the pursuit of post-secondary education and training for all Minnesotans. So for this week, we selected the topic Immigrant Visas and International Student Experiences within Higher Education. And the reason why we chose this topic is because, as we know, there are many issues that have division around policies and rules that impact these populations. One example is the public charge, right? And another one, just last month, we saw that the Trump administration has proposed to place a restriction on international students to prevent them from staying in the United States if they are taking all their courses online, right, due to the whole change pandemic and COVID. So while this controversial proposal didn't stick, what it did was cause a lot of more anxiety among these communities, along with safety concerns on college campuses. So today on the call, we will be addressing some of these concerns and hearing some of the lived experiences. We'll also respond to the questions and comments that our office received. And today our goal, and not just today, but our overall ultimate goal is to ensure that all students have the resources, tools, and support they need to feel safe and have a sense of belonging while they're pursuing a higher education credential. So today our MC will be Nikki Oliver. Nikki is our Grants and Government Relations Manager, and Nikki also plays a vital role in managing these public engagement calls. So Nikki, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thanks everyone for being on the call. A few logistic items before I introduce our panelists and go into the discussion. We will have the panels answer a few questions, and it's going to be pretty much like a roundtable and allow them to chime in on any questions they feel that they can answer, react to each other's comments, discussions, and if there's time at the end of the call, we will open up the chat. And we will manage the questions that come through. This is a very sensitive topic, and we're aware of that. We ask that everyone on the call are respectful and take heed to the sensitivity of this topic. And we appreciate all of our panelists for taking time out to speak, as the Deputy Commissioner has already said. So I'll introduce our panelists before going into the questions and going into our first part of this call. So we have Audel Shokohzadeh, who is the Community Engagement Director for Minnesota Department of Human Rights. We have Dr. Robert John Peterson, who is the Program Consultant for Minnesota Education Equity Partnership. We have Yiniela, excuse me if I pronounced that wrong, you can correct me, who is a recent graduate and international student from St. Cloud State University. We have Marissa Hill-Dongre, Director of Immigration Response Team from the University of Minnesota. We have Oballa, who is the former student president of LeadMN, a recent graduate student from Riverland Community College. We have Vladimir Dircio, a student services coach at Normandale Community College. And we have Teri, immigration law specialist at the Department of Human Services. Thank you all for being on. We'll jump in, and we're going to have Marissa explain the three terms for everyone on the call. I think it's very important to understand the difference and what these terms mean. So I'll hand it over to Marissa.
Thank you, Nikki. Good morning, everyone. This is Marissa speaking. And I think it's a really good idea to start off by just defining the different groups of students that we're talking about, because I think the general public has been learning a lot over the past few years about immigration law and policy and the terminology that's used, and it's important to get the term straight. So I'll just give a brief sort of definition of these three groups that we're talking about in order to give context to the conversation that we'll be having. So the first group of students that I thought I would define are Daca students. So Daca stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and as I assume everyone knows, Daca is a program that was created during the Oballa administration, and a Daca student is someone who's enrolled in higher education who's been granted this deferred action for childhood arrivals. What that means is that they have protection from deportation for a period of time, so they're undocumented before being granted this deferred action for childhood arrivals. And so DACA is protection from deportation plus work authorization, and then there are benefits that often follow from that, such as the ability to get a social security number, a driver's license, and other things that come from having that work authorization. There are students that are DACA eligible that do not have DACA and therefore remain undocumented. And it's possible that there are people, it's not possible, it is the fact that there are people with DACA who they may or may not be students, they may or may not be employed, neither their student status nor employment is required in order to maintain their DACA authorization. So that's the first group. The second group we said we would be talking about today are international students, and that's international student with quotes around it. It's a specific set of visa types. They're usually students on F1 or J1 visas. Those are visas that are short-term and for a specific purpose. And they're actually called non-immigrant visas under the immigration law. And for these individuals, their visa status is tied to their student status. So there are lots of requirements around their academic program and also a lot of rules and restrictions that they have to comply with. And the third group we're talking about are immigrant students. And this is a less specific term than DACA or international student. And it could mean a lot of different things depending on the context and who's using it. It's not a technical term. So it can reflect a variety of different immigration statuses. They could be asylum seekers, undocumented individuals. They could have temporary protected status. They could be a permanent resident. It really means probably someone who has immigrated to the U.S. In some immigration status or without lawful immigration status, and they're studying in the U.S. So hopefully that's good context to get us started.
Thank you, Marissa. So I'll go right into the questions. Some of these might be more directed specifically to the students, some to the organization's representatives, and I believe some of the agency folks will share some resources they have for these specific populations. The first question that I will be asking is more so for the students. As an immigrant DACA or an international student, what are the current challenges you have faced in higher education? Yeah, I'll let you just chime in, whoever wants to answer, Oballa, Vladimir, well, Vladimir's no speak, Yiniela.
If I may, although I'm not currently a student, I did go to the Minnesota State system myself as actually one of these students. Wasn't too long ago. So I do know that one of the biggest challenges that presents, and I see it right now with even my current students that I'm kind of interacting with, is the fact that although there's been more push towards, more exposure to this information, systematically within the Minnesota State system in higher education, institutions are slowly kind of moving towards, changing policies, changing different things internally, but we're not to that point yet. So a lot of it does have to come down to students feeling comfortable to open up, students feeling comfortable to say, hey, this is where my status is, this is where I'm at. And I even see it now. Students still apply as U.S. citizens or put other statuses for fear of being exposed with what's going on. And the thing with that is, if an institution doesn't have a representative that students feel comfortable with, some of those things may never come out to light, and they may just be hitting a lot of bumps along the road in terms of higher education. Because for me, and I always tell my students, it's not a matter of me having to know what your status is, but if you are comfortable enough with sharing that with me, then I can guide you through different resources that are available to you, and I can definitely, let you know what you are, what you do qualify for and what you don't qualify for. And far too often I do see students going out and applying for different types of resources, going through a full process, and then at the very end being told by those offices, well, because you're under the status, you don't qualify for that. But that's after the fact they've already gone through the full process, right? So for me, it's more so trying to mitigate that and really trying to minimize that in the fact that, if we know that you do qualify, let's get together, let's make a plan, let's go for it. But if I know that under your current status you don't, that's fine. Let's find another alternative, right, out in the community or even within our own institution, because right now I'm working for Normandale Community College, but I have worked for Minneapolis College as well. So we have a lot of different sister institutions that may have other resources, and I think at this point, with the current, situation with many students, it's about being flexible. It's about, if I know that my institution may not be 100%, suitable for a student, not being afraid to then send them out to another sister institution, because at the end, what we're really here for are our students and making sure that they have the resources they have to be successful within higher education.
Thank you, Vladimir. Does anyone have anything to add?
This is Oballa. You guys can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine, Oballa.
Yeah. Just to add on that, I think if I can relate, the challenges that most of the international or immigrant students are facing right now, especially due to this pandemic, I think is to lack of information, as the first panelist say there. I think most colleges, they're not providing like the best place for students to have like informed student about their status and also what they're going on. I think throughout the pandemic, I think what I saw when I was a president at LeadMN, the most complaint is the xenophobia that's going on, and also the racism, especially towards our international students, specifically the students from if they're from China or any Asian country like that. So a lot of students been really have like anxiety around this, because they are being targeted because of this virus. And for me, what I did is just talking to those students, and I addressed this with the chancellor, and it has been going on. But since this pandemic is going down now and everything, is starting again, I think it has been really a big topic for some of the students. And I hope as we go back on campuses, coming fall here now, I think those topics will come up again, that students who are from, specific Asian and other from those countries will be having the same challenge again, that you brought this virus here, that and that. So I think that's what I'm seeing the most right now. And some students, they feel like they don't want to go back to school. Some, they feel like they don't feel safe sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think this is kind of an extension of the question and some of the things you all have spoken to. But as students from these populations, what are some specific topics or situations or issues that you feel are being most ignored or unheard?
Hello, this is Yiniela. So, as a recent international student graduate, one of the things that I feel it's most ignored for us in the international community, it's around healthcare. So, for us, it's really complicated because, as you know, we come from different countries where the system is different. And now with this whole pandemic, I hear some students mention the fact that they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go, they feel scared that they will not be able to afford the Medicare or whatever they need to use for their health. So around that topic, for us, is really unknown, and we don't know what offices we can talk about it.
Thank you. So I think this question will be directed more towards the community org and institution folks on the call. What have institutions working with organizations and community groups to ensure that these populations of students exist?
This is Marissa. I'd be happy to start off speaking to that. So I work at the University of Minnesota, and I'm the director of the University of Minnesota's Immigration Response Team, and that's a unit that's existed at the University of Minnesota for about 3.5 years in acknowledgement. It was created because of the increased challenges and questions coming from immigrant students. So I also have a role in the International Student and Scholar Services Office at the University of Minnesota, so I really am working with all three of the populations that we're talking about in this call. And I think the benefit of something like the Immigration Response Team and different institutions are, I would say, across the board over the past 3.5 years, I've seen institutions work to step up their resources and services for international and immigrant students. But they haven't all taken the same approach. The benefit of something like the Immigration Response Team is that the goal is really to be a resource on all things immigration related for the university community. And that's sort of unusual to to have sort of an open view and say, if it's immigration related, we'll do our best to try to identify resources. Is it that you're eligible for the Minnesota DREAM Act but you don't know how to apply for it? Is it that you're running into funding or timing complications where your tuition or health insurance premium payment are due at a time where it's inconvenient for you to pay? Lots of times people get stuck between sort of the bureaucracy of the federal immigration system and all of the rules that come with institutions of higher education. And with the Immigration Response Team, I'm able to sort of help connect or translate between these big different bureaucracies. So I think there certainly there's still work to do, but with something like the Immigration Response Team, with having people who have background both in higher education and immigration law, they're able to give students a place where they can go and ask questions when they don't really know who to go to, especially if it's something around sensitive immigration type topic.
Thank you, Marissa. Anyone else have any comments? Want to chime in on this question?
Yeah, this is Dr. John Peterson with the Minnesota Education Equity Partnership. I think building off of what Marissa just said, I think it's really important to have multiple modes of communication with students from institutions and from systems. And some of it is rooted in best practices around how best to communicate with immigrant families and students, have continuous touch points, so phone calls, text, social media, email, prioritizing hard-to-reach immigrant students, including immigrant students who might have limited English proficiency and or lower literacy, phone calls, videos, radio. I know that I've heard across the nation that some of the institutions and systems have taken to different radio stations to communicate with families, some of the more nuanced, complex policy changes that might be happening at a particular school or within a system. I think videos can be very helpful to provide information to families, pictures, infographics. I just think there's so many different ways, including social media, to communicate with students who an email might be the worst way to communicate with the student. So just using those multiple modalities of communication from institutions and from systems to communicate the various things that are happening, whether the resources that are available, opportunities that are available. I know that each of the three institutions in Minnesota have tremendous opportunities for immigrant students, and I think sometimes it's just communicating them in a way that is most understandable to the students is important.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. To that, I want to ask the students, and even Vladimir, as you work with the students, what have you all seen from your institutions that has helped, or what has your institution provided to help with challenges in your lived experience?
Okay, this is Vladimir here from Normandale Community College. So in terms of that, kind of what you just mentioned here was the fact that, like, how do we take our systems and make them work for our students, right? Because, you know, being very honest and transparent, a lot of the systems we have in place aren't built for students of color and aren't built for these type of students to come in and, you know, be as successful as, let's say, a typical, you know, U.S.-born, white middle-class kind of student, right? So how do we really take that and us saying we support our students? It's not just a matter of speaking it and having, some events here and there once a year, but it's really how do we transform our internal systems to make that work? And one thing that I know Normandale has done for quite some time, even as my time there as a student, was that they actually created a position called the Latino Student Advocate. So as part of the admissions office, we now have a representative, and that position's been there for I want to say about 5 or 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, if not a little more, where students now in the admissions part of it can speak to someone who is part of the Latino community, someone who speaks Spanish, someone that they can maybe relate to, right? This obviously is not saying at all, and this is where we need to improve, as there are other communities besides our Latino community. It's just that I think in terms of our topic here, we just tend to be, kind of like a bigger percentage, right? But again, we've created partnerships, definitely with the Mexican consulate, offering scholarships, things like that. I know Normandale Community College, I think this year has about $10,000 to kind of provide for students, give different types of scholarships, maybe on Daca, undocumented, or kind of, in that other region, right? And in terms of something else is, I had mentioned that I previously worked for Minneapolis College. Minneapolis College actually recently created a whole division called the Equity and Inclusion Division. That division now serves its main goal and purpose to actually advocate for these students. So it's not just one position, but it's a whole division, it's a whole department. And within that department, there exist different coordinators, 3 of them so far. One of them for African American students, one of them for American Indian students, and then one for our Latino students. So those 3 positions exist, full coordinators. And within the Latino program there called Lucha, what has happened there is that they've been successful in creating a full scholarship program, which I know Minneapolis College, although I'm not with them anymore, they're very proud of. because they have found a way to not just say, we're here for you, but they've created a department that surrounds them with the support that they need and also provides actual, actual scholarship money where any student that gets accepted into a program called Star Scholars, they get their full 2 years paid for by the institution. And this is something that, again, is only at Minneapolis College, and I'm really proud and happy to see some of these changes going through. So depending on the institution, I know each institution moves at their own pace, but I think we're slowly starting to see some of these changes. And then for us, as previous students or as those working with the students, I think it's really important that we constantly voice, hey, our sister institution is doing this. Could we possibly, see how we could do our own version of, X, Y, or Z? Because again, it's really important to not just say it, but really demonstrate it and show it to our students that we're here for them and being able to kind of really help them and guide them through that. And like I said, with that program, the Star Scholars program, it's really important to also state, like I said, not put aside any other community, because in that program, not only do DACA students qualify, undocumented students qualify, but we also, at that point when I was directing that program, we were definitely accepting any undocumented student from any type of other community, because we know that although they're smaller communities, we have an undocumented Asian community. I've seen undocumented Russian community. I've seen different types of communities that are not as well known because they're not as big of a percentage, but they are here, and for us to be able to accept those students and say, you know what, here we will help you financially in trying to reach your goals for higher education really says a lot about an institution.
Thank you, Vladimir. Anyone else?
This is Oballa. I just want to add on what Vladimir had there. Yeah, as I said, like for us, when I was at LeadMN and also here in Austin, Minnesota, due to COVID-19, most of our students where they lost their job and all this stuff, so they kind of been going through like food insecurity and then other housing. So what we did, we talked with the Riverland, because after every college decided that a student will go back home, so we talked to the dormitory and school administration to keep those students who don't have where to go. So the second thing that we did here, specifically for Riverland here, we make sure the food pantry is open, and we partner with Ormel here in Austin, and then what I did personally and other students, we deliver meals to those students. Because some of them don't have cars, because they live in the dormitory, and everyone is under quarantine, all those. So what we did, we just make sure we deliver meals to the dormitory, and also the food pantry is accessible for them at a certain time. The staff will take them on campus, and then they can grab some meals. And then the other thing, what we did statewide, LeadMN created like a scholarship whereby a student will get that scholarship within 24 hours or 72 hours. And because, again, the first thing we prioritized was, the hunger. Because when students don't eat, they have to go, that they may experience more breakdown. So students will apply to those scholarships, and then within 24 hours and 72 hours, they get those scholarships. And we have so many applications, and our grant did not even last long. It went so fast because a lot of students, not only immigrant or DACA or international students, we open it to any student, because we have seen the food insecurity they're facing is not single anyone outside, because most of them, all of them lost their job.
Thank you, Oballa. I think you raised a good point of that not only do these populations of students face unique set of challenges because of the population they belong to, but also that they're also facing challenges that other students in the state are facing around basic needs. And a lot of times for these students, it's exacerbated or there's a fear of reaching out for those resources. One of the questions that I have is around what barriers have you all seen that are affecting real change from a policy level? I know, Oballa, you mentioned there's limited resources when you're trying to make changes, and I appreciate you, Vladimir, for expressing and acknowledging and highlighting the fact that these populations are very diverse. And I think that from my perspective as someone that has to work in policy, that a lot of times that's one of the issues is not understanding fully the complexities within groups. And that is also why I wanted Marissa to speak on the definitions as well. But I will open it up for you all to answer questions regarding barriers, like I said, affecting real change from a policy level, and then what steps are being taken to mitigate these challenges, or what things do you think need to happen to move real policy?
This is Marissa. One thing that comes to mind, this isn't a comprehensive answer for that question, Nikki, but one thing that comes to mind is just the how complicated immigration law and policy is, and people, lots of times there's a desire to, let's say, create a scholarship program or put some kind of policy change into place where people, sort of the people who are in the positions to be able to make those changes aren't sure whether they can, for example, give a scholarship to an undocumented student. Is that going to be allowed? Are there work rules or restrictions? How does the public charge rules, impact students accessing food shelves or other resources on campus? So I think making sure that people are connected to resources, both the people who need the services, but also the people who are in a position to change the policies, that they have the information they need to feel empowered to make those changes. So one situation that I run across in my work are departments that might be funding fellowships or assistantships or scholarships for graduate students who are concerned, or not who are concerned, who are accustomed to putting certain restrictions on that funding, and they think it's something that's required by law. That's not always the case. There might be restrictions on federal funding that don't apply to state or institutional funding, and to sort of educate institutions so that they know that the way they've always done things isn't necessarily the way they need to continue to do them. That will open up opportunities for students that will allow them to access more of the opportunities that they're qualified for and want to have access to.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone wants to chime in, you don't have to wait on me to direct you. But does anyone else have comments or want to chime in on some policy barriers or barriers to actually implementing change, and how actions that could help mitigate those challenges?
So, this is Vladimir again from Normandale Community College. With my past experience, I've seen a lot in policy, which, again, when it's up to like a federal level, things like that, it's not something we control, but we can definitely somehow try to provide as much support from our end in terms of the actual college, right? And I saw that a lot with my international students. So I actually had student workers and I had student worker positions. And for me, I always really like to have a great mix of, those maybe, U.S. citizens, maybe some student under DACA who was able to get a student worker position, or just international students. And for me, it was always not necessarily just throwing a handbook at them and saying these are the rules, but it's me really taking them, trying to as much as I can under my wing and saying, you know what, we're going to go through this together, because we have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of international students, getting a student work position is the world to them, because that's their only legal way of making any type of income in this country. So especially when COVID-19 hit and everything, that was one of the big discussions that we were having with Minneapolis College when I was with them at the time, and our policies and what we could do, right? And that was one of those things where I really fought with the Equity and Inclusion Division to say, we already have my students working, who were supposed to be working this semester, and the decision that was made at the end was, we're going to keep them on, we're going to keep paying them, but because of the situation, they're no longer working. And I remember a couple of my international student workers were like, oh my God, that means the world, because of what's going on, which no one had control over, they are not being penalized for something that's not in their control. So again, I think it really comes down to essentially what loopholes can we find, because a part of this, and I really want to stress this, is not about treating every student equally. It's not about equality. It's about equity. It's about the students who need it the most right now. How do we provide that support? And besides that, too, is I've seen the big change at Normandale Community College, whereas where internally our policies, they've changed it so that now our financial aid office is more involved with the Minnesota DREAM Act process, because our internal database system works exceptionally with the FAFSA, right, the financial aid component of it, but doesn't do that with the Minnesota DREAM Act because it's a different process on its own. So what Normandale has also done internally as far as policies, they've now embedded that into the financial aid department, where although it's not an automatic system thing, there's someone assigned to manually put in this data in our database system, so then it creates a roadmap for us as advisors, for us as counselors, to be able to log into our own database system and see where students are at with the financial aid or what decision has already been made, which makes it easier so that we don't have to go run around and try to figure out, everything in the background. So each institution, I think, is approaching it in their own way. Normandale, like I said, is very set on systems and structures, and it seems to be working quite well. Whereas Minneapolis College, again, being a little bit newer into this whole game, they took their own approach by creating this equity and inclusion division, and then that whole Star Scholars program to fully support. And again, I think Minneapolis College has been able to get about $150,000 for this year alone to give to these students who were accepted into that program. So obviously, like I said, institutions approaches it differently, but it does have to come down to us working internally to bring these topics up and say, hey, we know that we want to get, let's say, graduation rates up, retention, anything like that, but how do we successfully do that? And how do we keep it within a cultural lens? Because that's going to be important. How do we make sure that these students are successful and not treat them just as a number, but treat them as individuals, treat them and see exactly what they need to fill in that equity gap?
I want to just echo and affirm and confirm and validate what Vladimir just said, and in particular the pieces he mentioned regarding equity and equality versus equity, the difference between equality and equity. If we look at the equal outputs that we want to have by 2025 in terms of the attainment goal for 70% that was set up by the state legislature back in 2015 or 16, I don't recall which year it was, we have to fundamentally shift how we look at the input side of the system. And we cannot continue, in my estimation, to put equal inputs into a system that was inequitably set up from the very beginning. So I think putting a race equity lens and just a general equity lens on how we view the policies and the practices and the resource flows as conditions that need to shift to a more racially equitable condition. And I can provide a couple examples as they relate to POSSE students, of which immigrants and DACA and international students are a part of that group. persons of color, students of color, and Indigenous American Indian students. When we look at student financial aid, over the last, 10 years, between 2009 and 2017, Minnesota funding for full-time students has decreased by almost $3,000. There's been an overall decrease in the state's aid for higher education, and that's been coupled with increasing rates of tuition. Between 2003 and 4 and 2016 and 17, the cost of attending for tuition at a four-year institution has increased 164%, and for two-year institutions, it's increased 93%. So what we're looking at is a high debt and I know Minnesota has a good system comparative to some other states, but if we really truly want to build the world's best workforce, we need to take a look at that as a limitation. The NEEP recommends that the state reassess financial aid support to be more proportional to today's cost, students' income levels and cost of living, and specifically target resources for persons of color, students of color, American Indian, Indigenous students, immigrant students, Daca students, and international students. Another piece that we think is a limitation is that there's a high cost of living in Minnesota as a college student, and especially so if you're a person of color, American Indian, Indigenous, Daca, international, or immigrant student. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, the living and miscellaneous expense is recognized by the state in calculating state grants is set at $9,900. And they're set at the federal poverty level. So when we did our research last year for the policy brief we produced, we asked the fundamental question, how do we expect students to be successful in college if the living and miscellaneous expenses are calculated at 9 months, but they're required to pay their rent, as an example, or pay their bills, as an example, or pay for food, as an example, for 12 months instead of 9? So one of the recommendations we put in the brief was to calculate the LME, living and miscellaneous expenses, for 12 months instead of the current 9 months. So at NEEP, we think of fixing systems and institutions and structures, not the students. The students don't need fixing. And that's why we focused on student financial aid in our policy brief. And you can check it out on the NEEP.org website. I think we identified 4 or 5 different limitations, and then corresponding recommendations relative to student financial aid that we think can help us achieve the attainment goals that we've set as a state for 2025, that 70% attainment goal. But I just really appreciate Vladimir's comments because we need to look at it from an equity perspective, not an equal perspective, but an equity perspective. We need to look at it from a culturally responsive, culturally proficient and affirming perspective for our students. And until we start to move and shift those policies and practices and procedures at systems level and institution level, we're going to continue to see these inequities, and which have been probably only exacerbated by COVID-19. So, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Thank you, Vladimir. And I appreciate your comments about some of the proposals that you all put out from the NEEP. And from the Office of Higher Education's perspective, we are in agreement that there needs to be system changes. And we, as our Deputy Commissioner mentioned at the beginning of this call, are committed to looking at those changes and looking at how we operate from an equity perspective. And I can say the same for the Walls administration. There's a strong focus when we are putting out policy changes and the work we're doing here, and same for our Commissioner Olson here at the office. And we're looking at some of those things moving forward, what changes can be made to be more equitable in serving the students. And making changes, like you said, within the system, not changing the student, but changing the systems to fit the students that they receive. So another question that I have for you all, and I think this is where Audel and Teri might chime in a little more. What resources does your agency have to assist these populations of students? And I know Marissa and Vladimir had spoken on some, and Oballa actually, some things that have happened at some institutions. But what what are some things happening at some of these state departments or resources available to these students? And the reason I also asked you all to be on the call is because the student is a whole person, not just someone at a post-secondary institution. And I know you all have resources that could assist some of these students.
Hi, this is Teri. I'm with the Minnesota Department of Human Services. I'm in the Economic Assistance and Employment Supports Division. That's a very long way of saying that I work with the SNAP, or the Food Stamp Program, in the Minnesota Family Investment Program. That's MFIP. People may have only heard the acronym. So there are various resources for individuals who are non-citizens. The first place that people could go just if they want to apply is LeadMN, M as in Mary, N as in Nancy.org. So again, that's for folks who just want to apply. I can break it down a little bit just based on the general categories of folks that we're talking about today. So people who are DACA holders, we just recently were able to change our policy for the state-funded program. So this is a big change that we've made recently. People who are DACA holders are eligible for state-funded programs. Of course, there's lots of other eligibility criteria that they have to meet, but just based on immigration status alone, just as of August 1st, people who are DACA holders are eligible for state-funded programs. So that means someone who is DACA, who has a family. Again, if they meet all other eligibility criteria, they could qualify for the Minnesota Family Investment Program. And that's a program for families with children to help them meet their basic needs. So that's a really exciting change, in my opinion, that myself and my team worked really hard to implement just this month. So folks who have the general international student non-immigrant visa, like Marissa mentioned, the Act 1 and J1 students, non-immigrants are generally not eligible for the programs that I mentioned. Certainly folks still have every right to apply, but just generally speaking, they're not eligible. And then the broad category of immigrant students, it really depends on their status, and sometimes it even depends on how long they've been in that status. So people who have one of the, what we call a humanitarian protection status, like refugee or asylee or survivor of human trafficking, those types of individuals are eligible for federally funded benefits. So that means they would be eligible for both SNAP, which is food stamps, and MFIP, again, if they meet all other eligibility criteria. People who are green card holders or lawful permanent residents, it depends on how long they've held that status, but generally folks are eligible for some benefits if they're green card holders. So I would encourage those folks to apply. People who are in other statuses, like maybe they're an applicant for asylum, or they have TPS, or any other status. It just really depends, and it would take a lot of time for me to break it down by each status. So again, I would just encourage folks to apply if they think that they need those services and they meet the other eligibility criteria. Another important point, two more important points I want to make. One is regarding public charge. People who are concerned about public charge should call legal aid. So legal aid has agreed to be like the clearinghouse for the state of Minnesota, and they have a hotline from 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, and people can call 1-800-292-4150. We at DHS and at the county or tribal government level, we cannot give any type of legal advice or guidance regarding public charge or regarding any immigration law matter. Our job is in the public benefits law world, and the public charge rule is an immigration rule, so we can't give any advice or guidance on that. And of course, it's a very complicated rule, so we want folks talking with immigration attorneys. So legal aid is a free resource for the state. And of course, people can reach out to their private immigration attorneys as well. There's also a website that may be helpful for folks who want to find more information, and that is lawhelpmn.org. I'm going to spell that out. LAWHELPMN.org. There's lots of resources there that folks could read through and find some more information. And then the other thing that I think is really important to talk about is food shelves. So every person, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of if they do not have any immigration status, if they're people who are undocumented or without papers, they can receive assistance from food shelves. So everyone can receive food from a food shelf, and food shelves do not ask about immigration status. So people who need some immediate assistance like that can go to hungersolutions.org, and there's a tool there to find food shelves in the area. And I know, especially now during COVID, a lot of folks, especially who are undocumented, are concerned about driving, and there are less cars on the road, and people sometimes feel like they might be more of a target right now, and I certainly respect that fear. Hunger Solutions on their website, they do explain that some food shelves actually offer delivery services, so families can sign up for that. Of course, again, I respect that there's a risk in giving out one's address, but I just want to offer the resources about what's available. So I'm going to spell out that website for everyone. It's hungersolutions.org. HUNGERSOLUTIONS.org. I'd be happy to answer any specific questions, but that's my little spiel for right now. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Teri, and all the resources that are we'll circle back with everyone who has registered or the contact list and share those resources as well if you weren't able to jot them down. Audel, do you have some resources or information you can share from the Department of Human Rights perspective?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Audel, Shokohzadeh, Community Engagement Director with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And the Department of Human Rights is the state's civil rights enforcement agency. Our work is primarily focused on investigation into potential claims of discrimination. So our goal, our mission is to make sure that everyone that's in the state can lead lives full of dignity and joy, and to make sure that our state is discrimination free. So anyone that calls our office, that calls our discrimination helpline because they think that they're being treated unfairly, we do not ask for immigration status at all at any point in the process. And as I said, our chief concern is making sure that people are being treated fairly in the state. So what are some of the things that we do? Let's say that you are in a classroom and you are experiencing sexual harassment of some sort, and you go to a professor and you go to a dean and you say, I feel uncomfortable, I need you to step in, and they don't. You could call our office. That could be a potential claim of discrimination. Let's say you're looking to rent an apartment and you're a single parent, and the landlord says, well, we charge an extra security deposit on single parents. Well, that's a charge of discrimination, and you can call our office and we would launch an investigation. Or maybe you're in the workplace and you're in the bath, you're on break, you're talking to a colleague, and let's say you're speaking to them in Spanish, and a boss comes over and says you can only speak English when you're in this building. Well, that could be a potential claim of discrimination, and you want to reach out to our office. I use the word potential very intentionally because our team we're neutral investigators, so we listen to your story, we look at all the evidence, and then we reach out to the other folks involved. We reach out to witnesses, we compile all this information, and then we look and see what's in front of us and say, do we have enough information here to do an investigation, to reach a settlement, to change policy and practices. And so that's kind of our process. that we approach this, right? We're almost like detectives of sort, right? Looking at everything that's there to see what's going on. Something that's really important that I want to make sure folks know is that there's this what's known as a statute of limitation. Essentially, how long do you have from when you experience discrimination until you reach out to our office to do an investigation? And that time is a year. So if you wait longer than a year, too much time has passed, so unfortunately we won't be able to do anything. So never wait too long to reach out to us, and never question whether you should call us or not. We're here as a resource. You can call and say, hey, I think this happened to me. Do you think that that's something that you would investigate? And we'll let you know. That's what we're here for. So you can call us at 1-833-454-0148. We do have what is called a language line as a resource, so there are interpreters and translation services available, and we want to make sure that we have that conversation. We can walk you through the process of what an investigation looks like, what are the kind of next steps that we need to be taken. But, our primary goal is making sure that people in our state have dignity and joy in their lives. And so we're a resource there to protect your rights and make sure that we make Minnesota discrimination free. So I appreciate Nikki and the Office of Higher Education for giving us an opportunity to speak because, as she said, you're full of people and we want to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you, Audel. And for clarification purposes, and I know you said this in many ways, but I just want to be clear, this applies as well as if a student is experiencing something similar on their institution, and maybe even Marissa can chime in here if a student feels like they are not getting the services being provided to them because of their status or because of their group they belong to. What do they have the same options?
Yeah, so, to get a little bit more into the weeds of what we protect. So, immigration status, while we don't ask the question, it also isn't a protected class in of itself. But what our protected classes are just characteristics that we all have that more often than not could lead to people discriminating against you. So examples include like race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, disability. So in that realm, and there's an intersectionality of a lot of this as well too, right? And so in that sense, if there was a public institution that was preventing Spanish-speaking students from being able to access a particular resource, but white students were able to access it, or another group of students were. There's a potential there for investigation, absolutely. Or let's say, that it's on the basis of gender, right? That, women aren't able to access something, but men are. That's another aspect of investigation as well. So, yes.
Thank you. So I have another question that's, I guess, directed to everybody. I would love to hear from some students on this as well. What opportunities or resources do you wish schools would be providing in navigating post-secondary career? And also, what organizations or community groups have you worked with or received assistance with when needed?
So if I may, this is Vladimir Dircio from Riverland Community College. I know that one thing I'd really like to see in more of like more universal type Minnesota state level would definitely be taking some of the examples from some of our institutions and trying to apply them, right? Kind of collectively throughout the whole system. So like I had mentioned, what Normandale does with the financial aid piece, that's already embedded within our financial aid department for someone to manually input the Minnesota Dream Act information as we get notice of when it's awarded, how much is awarded. So that works with our database system. I'd really like to see that be implemented more into other, two-year institutions, possibly in our four-year state universities. Again, as an example to see that, we do have the bandwidth, it's just a matter of how do we, successfully kind of communicate that and build a plan so then others can kind of do that as well. And then going off that same kind of subject is the fact that, again, Minneapolis College made it a priority at one point or another to fund these students that otherwise don't, either get very little or no type of financial aid. So it's not a matter of fact that, that it's not possible. It is. We just have to really prioritize how each institution is budgeting, and if the foundation offices are able to raise money. So again, it's more of the institution itself on a ground level really has to believe in these students and really has to want to invest in these students heavily, because again, for a program that hasn't, been around too long, like that Star Scholars program that I've been mentioning, right now they are on their 6th cohort. So already 5 cohorts have come beforehand where students have gotten paid up to 72 college credits, which otherwise would have been almost impossible for them to cover, being undocumented under whatever status they are. Very difficult for them to fund their education. So again, it comes down to these little things internally within our policies that I think really need to I personally would like to see some more of this change, not just from an individual institution, but kind of spread out more through our Minnesota state system. And then another thing that I personally would love to really see, again, is more representation. Because if we look at it, especially within higher education, and I'm surprised even within the metro area, we see that a lot of our administration, being frank, are white. And it's one of those things when we look at it, and if we chop down to see what percentage of our students are Black, Latino, identify Somali or something like that, we see that we have a good amount of students, more so I think within the metro area, and I know specifically at Minneapolis College, where there's students of color. Yet that doesn't reflect, within our administration. For those that actually have the power to kind of make these internal systematic changes. So I'd like to see that, and not just that, but also even within the offices of admissions, I, at this point, am very, very surprised that we don't have someone to represent the Somali population, because in the state of Minnesota, we see a lot of people that belong to that specific group and self-identify as such. And for me, it's how are we not putting that as a priority, even though I personally do not identify and am not part of that community. I see that community present. And for me, it's surprising that we don't have representatives. We don't have admissions people going out to the high schools, to events, to these big convention center type college fairs, in Minneapolis, where they're able to represent their institutions, but through this lens. So for me, I would really like to see more of that within our institutions, within the admissions offices, within just kind of spread out, right? Because as of right now, again, the big challenge that we see is we have that one person at that one college who you can talk to, but that's only one person, right? We need to see more of those people built into the actual system, get hired. Again, if that is really our goal to change internally, I obviously know this is not going to happen overnight, but it is something that we should be looking forward to.
Hello, this is Oballa. I just want to add what I wish to happen. I wish one thing. I hope there will not be any other pandemic that will come again. And if I can relate to this one, I feel like our international students have been really forgotten with this administration and throughout the United States, especially when this pandemic hit everyone. the government is more likely, to try to support the students who are here with the CARE Act and all those stuff. But we forget that international students contribute to American economy by 45 billion, annually. And we forget that having international students here help most of our student exposure to different cultures. And when we are being faced with such crisis, and we ignore them and watch them as some people who are not beneficial to our economy. And throughout my advocacy, especially this year, I really felt bad for international students when the CARE Act came out and say that they are not eligible to it, and with some suggestion that they will have like a different grant that they can qualify for within their school, and that did not happen to most of our colleges. I wish the government could see our students in different lands, especially international students, to support them, because some countries like Australia, they pass CARE Act that supports every student, but here in America, we do not see anything like that. And we know from those students, most of them come from, let's say, Europe, and this pandemic has hit everyone, every corner on earth. And for us to think that, they can still get money from their country, but they're not. Everyone run out of job, everyone lose their job in their country, and we have the opportunity here to help them as well as our students, because they are part of our family, and they are part of our institution. I just wish in the future we will see support, bigger support for our international students. That's one thing. And then the other thing, I feel like most colleges, they should be more, transparent with information, because I know there are a lot of colleges that have support, that have grants, especially for immigrant students, but they put it at the bottom of the website, or somewhere they don't talk about it. They don't advertise it. They don't advertise some grant, the aid that a student can apply for, and then when you apply for, you will be forced to go through different processes, and when other students apply, they go straight to it. I have seen this on different campuses. I've seen this from students. They're telling me so-and-so will apply. They get it right away. So-and-so apply. They don't get it, or they give an excuse that they're not eligible to it. So I feel like we should be more looking into those in a bigger way, and in a generous way, whereby everyone is served instead of discriminating. Thank you.
Hi, this is Yiniela. So I was listening to some of the resources that some of the offices have to offer here in Minnesota, and one thing that I would love to know, which is that some of those resources were able to reach the international or the other students that I need. Because for me, in my case, some of these resources are completely new for me. I didn't even know they exist. So I would love for those offices to reach more to those international or immigrant students, because they feel, or in my case, I would say, I feel like I was only able to speak with the international center in my school. That was it. I thought that I didn't realize there were more officers that I can talk to about the different problems or situations. Another thing that I would like to touch is the opportunities that we have as an international student. Students are really limited. And right now, with everything that is happening, I feel like they're becoming less and less available for us. Let's say for work opportunities available, we are pretty limited, and we don't see any changes. For me, I've been here for 4 years, and I think the opportunities are getting less and less available for us.
Thank you, everyone, for your insight and input. I'd like to reiterate some things that were said. It sounds like in some of the orgs and departments and other folks on the call could also chime in, and I think Dr. Peterson had mentioned this earlier, that there's a communication barrier here, and there should be better ways to let these students know what's available to them, and how to communicate that and help them understand the resources and how to navigate that. And I think Vladimir said one of the things is making sure on campus there's more than just the one, or like Yiniela had said, that it shouldn't just be the International Resource Department that the students have to go to, or to find information. And to reiterate the point that I think over 25% of enrollment are students of color. We don't have the exact data on immigrant students, but that's a significant number when you think of the total population of students in the state, and that they don't have representation when it comes to administrative workers and things of that nature. So those things are noted from my perspective and from our agency's perspective as we move forward with the work. Given that, I'd like to ask if anyone has any additional comments or things they want to add, or what else do you think higher ed and higher ed institutions, it could be our office, it can be the state in general, but need to know what is maybe one of the single most helpful things that we could do or they could do to support these populations of students. I know you all have mentioned a lot of things on here, but yeah.
Just as Marissa, one of the things that I think would be helpful that might be sort of a natural result of calls like this would be for the various different state departments and agencies and institutions around the state to have some knowledge, like Vladimir was talking about the different programs that are available at the different institutions where he's worked. I know I do a lot of referring of students to the Office of Higher Education for DREAM Act purposes. I know that a lot of the students that I end up working with end up getting referred to me because other units within the University of Minnesota know about the immigration response team. What I'm trying to say is if we all have a better idea of what resources are available at different institutions and departments, we can help be a point of reference if there's a student transferring from one institution to another, if there's a student we're helping on a given issue that might benefit from resources at a given institution, because I think I agree with the comments that have been made about needing to be more systematic about changing the way that we are offering higher education and the resources that are connected to it to students who have not been have not had as much access to that information. And as we're doing that work, I think we also need to be connecting students to the resources that are there. So, just a knowledge of what resources are out there, so that even if it has to happen by word of mouth, student by student, that's better than it not happening at all. So all of us being educated about what's available might mean that we're able to connect students.
This is Dr. Peterson. This is John. Just want to chime in here quickly. I know that the Education Coalition out in the state of New York put together a PDF of best practices relating specifically to communicating with immigrant families, international students, and Daca students. And I think it was focused mostly with New York City, and was sent to the Chancellor of New York City Public Schools, and really focuses in on K-12, but I think those best practices are transferable over to higher ed, post-secondary as well. And I can certainly forward those on to you, Nikki, so that you have those and can share those however you see fit. And I want to speak just a little bit to the comments that have been made, especially Oballa's comments. Racism works at 4 different levels. at a micro level and is held individually, but is also held interpersonally between more than one person. And I think, folks on this call who are people of color, who have experienced discrimination, who have experienced racist acts, know well what that feels like and what that lived experience is like. We also have to have some serious conversations about racism at the macro level, however. And there's two different aspects to macro level racism, or anyism for that matter. One is systemic or institutional racism. Okay? When you have multiple systems and or multiple institutions working in conjunction with a racist set of policies or procedures or practices, and I'm not saying that to any one particular institution or system on this call, but I'm talking about the historical context of racism in higher education over the last 200 years in this country. You're talking about structural racism. So we have to have some serious conversations about what that means, not only at the individual interpersonal level, the micro level, but also at the macro level, and have conversations that are real, like the ones that we're having today. I'm so thankful to be a part of this. Another piece that I'll add is that if we want to change those systems, we need to use the race equity lens to change the outcomes that we're seeing, the disparate outcomes based on race, and the racial predictability we see with a college degree completion. The FSG.org has what's called the Water Systems of Change. They identify 6 conditions of systems change. And those 6 conditions include policies, practices, resource flows, relationships and connections, power dynamics, and mental models. So those are the conditions that hold a particular ism in place, racism or genderism or ageism or whatever it might be. Shifting those conditions is what needs to happen to get to a more racially equitable condition for each of those areas. And that's where we're going to see that transformative change and the structural change that needs to happen. So I just wanted to throw those 2 pieces out. I'd be happy to share this with Nikki as well. But I just really appreciate the conversation and the realness of the perspectives being shared today.
This is Vladimir. I just want to actually add a little bit to that as well. Thank you so much. Trying for us on an individual level and then a systematic level, really understanding, trying to comprehend exactly what we're dealing with, right? One thing that I know is very important, and while working at Minneapolis College, we're really trying to bring a new advising model, something as simple as that, right? Because I think far too often the way our system is built, and I say this specifically because I know first-generation students or international students, when they start college here, everything is different than what their parents may think higher education looks like, right? The way we structure things, the way students select their own classes at times, choose their own professors. And one of the biggest things that I really, in my years of in higher education as a professional, as much as I can, I really try to change my mentality as to how I am approaching students, because our current model and the way that we as advisors are kind of trained in and taught is essentially with the savior mentality of how can I help you, right? When in fact, it's not kind of what you were mentioning. It's not about us changing the students, it's about us changing our institutions to better fit the students. It's not that the students lack the comprehension or the knowledge of higher education. It's just that the system here is different. So it's teaching them that. But at the same time, for me, even in my day-to-day language, when I speak to my students, again, I've changed it so that it's more of a how can I be of assistance? Again, trying to empower students through our language, through our everyday conversations of how can I be of assistance? Because if I come into an advising session with that mentality of I'm here to help you, it's that savior mentality. It's us feeding into the system that was created. So for me, it's trying to disrupt it as much as I can as far as I'm learning, right, along the way, because I'm sure there are many things. And then, again, also being able to feel uncomfortable, being able to learn things. For example, for me, one of the biggest challenges at Minneapolis College was how do I respectfully approach a certain population, a certain culture, while still me feeling comfortable. And one example was I had a lot of female Muslim students come in, and again, under a traditional kind of more Western approach, you approach them, you extend your hand because you want to be welcoming, you want to be open, and you say, welcome, hi, how may I help you? And I realized that the response that I was getting was not what I was expecting, and then therefore I started to realize, in a cultural context, this may not be appropriate for me as a male, wanting to extend my hand and expect for the same cultural response, right? So being able to see that, and from then on, I spoke to my department. We had a conversation about it, and now when approaching any type of female Muslim student, I don't extend my hand unless I see that coming from them, and it's more of a, would you like me to advise you here in our main office, or would you feel comfortable going into my office and having a discussion about admissions, about classes, about whatever you need to. So it's, again, a combination of us coming in with a how may I assist, but also keeping that cultural lens, because their culture is as important as what I grew up with and what I know, is, my culture. So again, being able to experience those things and being able to change it will make a big difference when interacting with these students. So then that was just something that I wanted to add to that.
Thank you, everyone. I think we have about 9 minutes or so left on this call, so I think we'll go ahead and open up the chat for whomever who's still logged in here. And just a reminder that these are recorded, so it will be shared. But if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. If we don't receive any questions, I will close up the call. So I'll give you guys a second. We'll open up the chat here. And I do thank the panelists once again very much for your comments, your directions, your feedback, and especially the students and former students for sharing your personal experience. I know sometimes it's not easy to talk about those things, but I really appreciate you all doing that here on this call.
Hey, excuse me, Nikki, this is Marcia. Looks like Marissa shared another resource in the chat. I just want to just go ahead and read it out. So it's another organization that helps with higher education and immigration nationwide. It's the presidentsalliance.org.
And I can speak a little bit to that. So it is a coalition of college and university presidents who have joined this organization, which is working with issues that are impacting all of the populations that we've been talking about during this call. And they've got a website and a very active listserv. They do a lot of trainings, and they could be a good resource for people who are looking to learn more about these immigration-related issues.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions here in the chat for the panelists or for our agency. So once again, I want to thank the panelists. The call was recorded, so we will share this out. We will also follow up with all the resources that were shared via an email to everyone. I want to also let everyone know that we have what we have planned for the next few calls. The call next week, we have plans to talk about equity and advising on college campuses and also TRIO student services. And then we move to doing bi-weekly calls because, school will be starting up. And we think that we need a little more time in between these calls. But September 16th, we have it planned to talk about applying for college application process, what to do after you apply, especially during COVID-19 and what's happening on campus at that time. And then at the end of the month, September, being that FAFSA opens up October 1st, FAFSA, and we will have a call solely focused on FAFSA, new guidance, and also DREAM Act. I know that was something mentioned here, how DREAM Act is a totally separate application, and that is also something that's managed out of our office. So we will have a call focused on that. And then October 14th, we will have a panel made up of all American Indian to talk about American Indian experiences in higher education. And our very own Commissioner Olson will be the MC for that call. So I just wanted to let you all know that. I do encourage, there is a form where you can submit questions, comments, or you can just email us at the office if you have questions, comments, interests, things that you would like us to address on these public engagement calls. I would like to reiterate that this is not our only form of public engagement. It is just a tool in the tool belt, and I think it's a tool that's useful in the time that we're in currently, that we can't physically go out and meet with everyone, but we encourage feedback, we encourage comments, we encourage questions, and once again, I want to thank everyone who was able to join us, and just thank the panelists once again. We appreciate hearing your voice and comments and the resources you all have shared.